Beginnings are easier to talk about than endings. We all start from the same place. Our favorite beginnings are eminently quotable, easy to share. But divorced from their stories, endings are meaningless. A good ending is like a secret that demands to be kept. No one wants to know the ending to your favorite story until they've read it themselves. It's a funny predicament. Endings are essential, so we're not allowed to ruin them, and thus, we're not allowed to talk about them. It is a lot easier to start a story than to finish one. After all, a story can start with wherever your idea starts. But where is your story supposed to end? How do you know? What is the right ending to the tale you're telling? In Wonderbook, a fantastical book about fantasy writing edited by Annihilation author VanderMeer, Desirina Boskovich, a 2007 graduate of the Clarion Writers Workshop, delivers her position on the challenges of endings. Hollywood executives might think that the right ending to any story is the one that satisfies the most moviegoers on their first viewing of the film. It's the ending that fulfills all the audience's expectations. But if this was true, wouldn't The Empire Strikes Back have the worst ending of the Star Wars movies? Boskovich gives a different take. The right ending isn't always the ending the reader wants. This doesn't mean that an ending has to be a surprise twist that subverts reader expectations. Those gimmicky style of endings tend to fail more often than they succeed. But it does mean that the ending should serve the needs of the story, above and beyond the surface desires of the assumed audience. And I agree with this. When choosing your ending, how the reader wants things resolved should be far down on your list of criteria. On the top of that list should be which ending that flows organically from the story best resolves the idea that I set up to deliver the effect on the reader that I'm looking for. Or to put it shortly and sweetly, what is the right ending for this story? Boskovich points to several examples, such as Walter Miller's A Canticle for Leibowitz and Stephen King's The Dark Tower series, the endings of which illustrate the theme that there's no real conclusion to the story of human struggle, which means there's never a happy ending, but there's always hope for one. As for The Dark Tower and its gutsy ending, from Stephen King I learned, don't be afraid to take the story to its inevitable conclusion. But Karen Joy Fowler taught me the opposite. Don't be afraid not to, because it also takes courage to let the reader draw her own conclusions. It takes nerve to exit the moment right before the bomb drops, the train derails, the shots ring out. Very helpful, right? Take your ending to its logical conclusion. Stop before the logical conclusion of the ending. Well, it depends on the story and the needs of the story, of course. Contradictory writing advice, so helpful, I know. She isn't wrong, though. Sometimes full resolution is necessary, but often it's not. And knowing what story questions to answer with your ending and which threads to leave loose is a skill best developed through practice and trial and error. But as with other writing skills, close reading can help us to understand endings, which can of course help us to enrich our own writing practice, if and when we apply that knowledge. Write your ending, then delete the last paragraph. If you can, delete the next one too. What's left? It's often the moment of greatest power. So resist the urge to explain yourself. Abandon that last loose end. My favorite endings leave me leaning forward, mouth open, pulse pounding, longing for just a little more. I tend to agree with this. Never leave the reader fully satisfied. Always leave the reader an important question or two to ponder and argue and make fan theories about. The mystery is part of the fun and part of the core idea of story. As a caveat, this doesn't mean you should just frustrate your reader. An ending that doesn't give any answers to these central story questions is often as bad as or worse than one that gives too many. But Boskovich is right that as a general rule, the promise of violence is more chilling than violence itself. The end comes right at the moment of unbearable dread. So many great stories end this way, right at the cusp, the precipice of violence. Edgar Allan Poe's The Mask of the Red Death, Ernest Hemingway's The Old Man and the Sea, Shirley Jackson's The Lottery, Neil Gaiman's Click Clack the Rattlebag. In my own collection, Bad Art, see the story Closing Time. I love that ending with the ambiguous, sometimes clear promise of violence. It doesn't always have to be clear. Like many of the stories I love, my own often end with some degree of ambiguity. I do love me some ambiguity in my story endings, as long as it is thoughtful, intelligent, emotionally resonant ambiguity. Not just the lazy, confusing ambiguity of a writer who didn't bother to think through the story questions that they set up as they were writing the story to begin with. The lesson here is to answer the story questions that you need to answer for the story to make sense and hold meaning for your reader. But don't be on the nose about what that meaning is. Let the reader decide that for herself. It's a difficult balancing act, for sure. And like so much of writing, it lacks a magic formula to get us a kick-ass ending to every story. They're hard to find. But Boskovich does give us some ideas. Like so much of writing, the right ending always seems to come from pieces like these. Charged images and universal symbols. Things I know without knowing. Finding the right ending takes thinking and scheming, but dreaming too. Intuitions blind and brilliant, fumbling in the dark. When an ending works on an intellectual level and on an emotional level, that's a story with staying power. Of course, this isn't something that just comes by magic during the course of writing a story. It results from, as I said, a process of trial and error. You have to put your possible endings to the test. Common questions to help test your ending include: have I stopped too soon? Have I gone too far? Have I tried too hard to provide closure? Have I provided too little closure? Have I tried too hard to explain the fantastical element? Have I tried to make the fantasy element carry too much of the weight of the ending? Does my beginning not support my ending? Does my ending not support my beginning? Do I provide the right kind of closure? Have I made things too easy for my characters? Of course, in answering these questions, you might find that the problem lies at the beginning or middle of the story, not at the end, and you need to go back and fix something earlier. But whatever your ending, always remember that imbuing fiction with a life that extends beyond the last word is in some ways the goal. The ending that goes beyond the ending in the reader's mind, so invested are they in the story. That's always the goal. You want the reader to want more and more and more. You never want them to feel fully satisfied and sated with your story or with your story world. You want them to always demand more of it and always leave them wanting that little bit more. Don't give all of it to them. A few notes to keep in mind. A story will be more or less successful depending on how faithful it is to its own setup, or even to an intentional violation of its setup. So in other words, the arc, if there is one, there should be some kind of story arc, should be understandable. It shouldn't seem arbitrary or broken or interrupted for no good reason. A good story will reward readers' general expectations, allowing them to complete the story's shape in their heads, while telling an interesting tale with surprises within scenes and even sentences. A great story might reward those general expectations to some extent, but thwarts expectations in the particulars of some matter important to the narrative. A great story provides to the reader something unexpected that, when considering the beginning of the story, still makes sense and does not make the reader feel cheated by the writer. It completes a structure more complex or simply different from that expected by the reader. Again, this is a difficult program to follow. Getting the right ending to a story is a tough balancing act. But those questions from earlier and some of the considerations that we've brought up here give us a decent starting guide. So go ahead and give this a try. Try this on your own stories. If you have an ongoing story that you're trying to find an ending of, play with it. Are you going to give all of the information or just a little bit of the information? Play with the various different degrees of solutions that you apply to the central story problems and see which one resonates the most with the reader, both intellectually and emotionally. Post your thoughts on story endings in the comments below and any takeaways you have from this exercise. And while you're down there, like the video, subscribe to the channel, all that good stuff. Thank you guys. Happy Thanksgiving just passed for those of us in the US. And until next time, good luck and good writing. Peace.